Hey, this is Freddie C., one of the producers of the Living Force podcast and host of Legends Lookback, and you're listening to a sneak peek of one of our Patreon exclusive shows from Youtini.com. If you like this content and you want more, head over to patreon.com/Youtini. May the Force be with you.
I really started Youtini because I wanted to share my love of the expanded universe with literally anyone that would listen.
I'm not saying it's better than the Falcon, but it comes close.
It's fun reading into the gaps between the films.
Heir to the Empire changed fandom forever.
Star Wars is for everyone.
Some of the first books I read by myself were Star Wars books.
If you're not reading Star Wars books, you're missing out on so much.
Her lightsaber hilt was carved from a rancor tooth.
I don't think I realized how deep her character got.
Who knows where they're headed next?
You're listening to Legends Lookback, a Youtini podcast with your hosts, Jared Mays and Freddie C.
Welcome to episode 1 of Legends Look Back. This is a Patreon exclusive show for Youtini.com in which we take members of the Youtini team and talk about Legends book of their choosing, which we're not quite going to do in the very first episode here, but eventually that's what we'll do. We're taking a personal approach rather than a purely informational one, and we're going to do our best to generate interest in a book. Even if you've never really dipped a toe into Legends, this is still a show for you. And we have a commitment to positivity. We're going to celebrate the books rather than drag them through the mud. Even though, hey, we might have a laugh here and there, ultimately this is all about us loving these books. So I'm Jared Mays, one of your hosts, and I'm joined by...
Freddie C. I'm here as well.
Welcome, Freddie. Excited we get to do this.
It's good to be back.
I say it's episode 1, but we did do an episode 0. Hopefully that sees the light of day as well. And hey, maybe you've already listened to that, in which case, welcome again to our listeners. We're excited that you're listening to us. We're just thrilled about this project. We've been talking to different members of the Youtini team about coming on and talk about their favorite books. In fact, we've got a little bit of competition between Charles and Eric about who's going to get to come on for the A.C. Crispin Han Solo trilogy. So we might actually have to divide that up into multiple episodes. But I'm excited. What about you, Freddie?
Yeah, I'd have to say, you know, for the longest time, we've lived with Legends. What are called Legends now, right? But before they were just canon. So the fact that we can actually go back and start talking about these again, it feels very nostalgic and it feels good. So I'm into it. I like it.
Well, it's been fun for me ever since we started talking about this idea. I started going back and thinking about, well, which books do I feel like I've got a really good grasp on and which ones do I need a refresher course? And not a pun there for Star Wars Legends fans, where bathrooms, of course, are called refresher units. Anyway,
that's right.
I've had to go back and look at, well, which books do I now need to reread or want to reread? I'm thrilled to say, Freddie, that I'm about a third of the way through Kenobi again, now that we've got the new Kenobi show announced, and Charles has said he wants to come on to talk about that. And man, it's just a fantastic book. Have you read that one?
Yeah, Kenobi is definitely in my top 5. And if you look on Youtini.com, it's actually one of the foundational 5 books.
There we go.
I think to this day, it's you know, until the show comes out, and if anything contradicts it, but in the meantime, it is one of, I would say, my platinum standard books to read. And
you know, definitely for me too. And so we're going to come back to that in a minute. We're going to talk about some standout Legends books for both of us. But first, we want to give you a little bit of a sense of who the two of us are, since you're going to be listening to us every other week or so, depending on our release schedule and all of that. First and foremost, I'll let Freddie go first. Go ahead.
Yeah.
How did you first get into Star Wars first? We'll move on to Legends after that. But first, how did Star Wars come into your life?
So it's very funny. I was probably about 5 or younger, and I was just watching TV, and my parents had, I want to say, it must have been the Ewok film. It was one of the early films.
Oh, man, I love those Ewok movies so much.
Yeah, and I just remember watching it, and then my parents introduced me to episode 4. You know, at the time it was just Star Wars.
Breach.
And you know, at that time it was already out for 10 years or so. You know, I mean, it was out for a while. But I got really into it. I started seeing Luke do some Jedi Jedi tricks, use the Force, and I had a pencil on the table, and I was doing my best to try to move that pencil. So those were my early memories for sure.
Awesome. Yeah,
Yeah.
and if you listen to the Living Force podcast, which I'm going to guess, in terms of the spheres of our users here who are listening to our show, it's got to be at least 99% who are
Yeah.
avid Living Force listeners, in which case, welcome. And you've already heard both of us on a couple of team cameos, especially the best cameos. Those have been ours. Well, maybe not. We've got some great cameos on that show, don't we?
We do. We really do. I get to edit a lot of those before I hand it off to
Oh, yeah,
Matt.
that's right.
So they're all really good. But
yeah, so you've heard me. Go ahead.
I was going to ask you, let's go with you too. Well, how did you get into it?
Yeah, I told the story on a cameo, but the basic idea was, I was 5 years old, and my dad has always been a college administrator, and so I mean we've had students over at the house, just almost every day of my life growing up, and so I always thought I was a college student. We were always doing all kinds of different events in terms of going on out of state trips and spring break trips and this, that, and the other. But this one particular night in 1997. We were going to the movies, which was kind of a new thing for me, being 5 years old. My parents letting me go to the movies. I remember seeing maybe a couple of movies in the theaters before Star Wars, but only 2 or 3 at max. And this one night, there were like at least 50 college students lined up outside the movie theater, which, I mean, how things have changed. I mean, we're probably talking about Star Wars tickets going on sale tomorrow, is one rumor, maybe Monday. Hey, if you're listening to this, maybe you already have your tickets, in which case, congratulations, and I hope that I do too. But in 1997, we had to wait in line outside the theater to buy tickets, and we did so in the pouring rain. There were like 50 of us, and it was just so electric. People were so excited to go see Star Wars in the theaters, and I had no idea that it was already a 20-year-old movie. I didn't realize it was a re-release. I just thought it was a brand new film. I think it was the next day my dad took me to Walmart to buy some action figures. And I think I bought Chewbacca and Boba Fett day one, which I'm very proud of my 5-year-old taste in getting Chewbacca and Boba Fett.
Those are pretty solid buys.
Yeah, the funny thing, of course, is I lost that Boba Fett. And I was so upset about it that Dad took me back to buy another Boba Fett, in which case I found the original. So now, over here right behind me in the Star Wars collection, I have 2 identical 1996 Power of the Force Boba Fetts.
Oh, that's great. That's fantastic.
Yeah. So how about Star Wars Legends? How'd you get into the EU?
So this is actually a really funny story. I didn't know Legends existed for a long time. I did have a book that was kind of like what was it, like a visual guide, everything you needed to know about Star Wars kind of book. And I remember, I'm pretty sure it said that Owen Lars was Obi-Wan's
his brother.
Yeah, his brother, right?
Sure.
Yeah, exactly. So I have that book, and that was like probably the first one that I ever had.
I wonder what that's in.
But
yeah.
I have it somewhere still. But
if any of our listeners know the answer, tweet it at us. All right.
Absolutely. Answer. We got to know. I have to know. But my first actual novel was The True Set Bakura, which I will constantly mention as one of my favorite books, only because it was my first.
You want to hear something crazy, Freddie?
Go ahead.
I've never read A True Set Bakura. I've read, I keep a spreadsheet. I've read over 200 Star Wars books, and I have not read that one. It's on my short list of like my next 5 or 10 to get into.
That's awesome.
So I'm glad to hear you like it.
Yeah, well, what happened was I forgot to bring a book during our reading hour, and my professor, or not even professor, my teacher, I think it was like maybe middle school, beginning of middle school, maybe let's just say 6th grade, right? It was sitting there, and I was like,
perfect
Star Wars
age.
Yeah, I love Star Wars. I see this book, and I started reading it. I was like, oh my goodness, this is a Star Wars book. And then I looked in the cover, and it had a list of all the other books. I was like, there's more?
Oh, man, I just spent countless hours looking at that timeline in the front of those, the EU books, the Legends books. As a kid,
yeah.
I would just look at that map for hours.
Same. And from there, I just really got into it and read everything you could think of at that point, everything that was out. Splinter of the Mind's Eye, which was interesting to read since it kind of didn't really match up.
Yeah. Oh,
With,
it's so weird.
yeah. And you know, I think that's the thing you have to take with Legends, especially now, is you have to read them and know that it's Legends.
Well, and I
You
think
know,
that's
yeah,
part of what makes Legends so good, and we'll get into this in a minute, is you have to read every book within its context of not just where it fits in the timeline of Star Wars, as in before or after the Battle of Yavin, but in terms of what year in real life it was published.
yeah,
I mean, especially the Bantam era books before '99. I mean, they were just totally ignorant of anything that happened in the prequels. And sometimes reading them now, you're like, oh, this is so frustrating. Why aren't they talking about Padme? But there was no Padme. And so, you know, in terms of where it sat in its place in history, it can really help make some sense of what's going on in a lot of the Legends books. And I think that's what
yeah,
makes them great in a lot of ways.
yeah. So yeah, that was definitely my entrance into the EU. But yeah, what about you?
Ah, man, it's just so awesome to think about the kind of experience that I had discovering the EU. I wonder how much of my memory on this is tainted by nostalgia and excitement. But I lived in a small town in Oklahoma, Chickasha, Oklahoma. If any of our listeners are from Chickasha, go Chicks. Our mascot was literally the fighting Chicks, which they're going to
That's
have to change
fantastic.
that sooner or later. You know, but in our particular town, my mom worked right down the street from the library. And, you know, she would never drop me off for very long by myself, but I was 10 years old and was in the library alone. My mom had dropped me off. She worked right down the street. And I just wandered outside the kids section and I found this massive bookshelf. You know, I was 10 years old. So how big was this bookshelf really? I don't know. But looking up at it in hindsight, it was just as high as the eye could see. And it was just wall to wall Star Wars books, floor to ceiling, you know, all the Zahn books, all the X-Wing books. At that point, we probably had a few New Jedi Order books. That series probably partly finished, all the Bantam era books. And I just remember thinking, oh, this is going to be fun. And that's how I got into it and have never stopped. I'm still, to this day, trying to finish reading the Legends timeline. I'm maybe 15, 20 books away. Hopefully
Oh,
for
that's pretty
next
solid.
episode, I can be, oh, I've read a bunch. I have read a bunch. Like I said, over 200 Star Wars books at this point. Right
That's
now,
impressive.
I'm halfway through um, the Republic Commando series by Karen Travis. It is fantastic. I didn't love the first one, and you know was like, I'm not sure about this, but oh my gosh, the second one was just excellent.
Mhm. Yeah.
They're weird in some ways, a little bit problematic here and there. I'm not going to get into that right now. But you know, I kind of fell out of Star Wars for a few years. When I was in high school, I would read the Bane books or some of the Old Republic stuff, but wasn't really keeping up with it as much. I didn't go see the Clone Wars movie in theaters, which I'm kicking myself for now, over 10 years later. I wasn't watching the Clone Wars while it came out, but when my wife and I were on our honeymoon, we stopped in a bookstore, and I found the Young Jedi Knights like collected editions. And I said, "Oh my
Oh, yeah.
gosh, I used to love these when I was a kid." And I bought both of them. I read the first 6 Young Jedi Knights books on my honeymoon.
That is a
And
great way
have,
to spend your honeymoon.
oh no, isn't it crazy? Yeah, we were at the beach, and they're great little beach reads, and that's how I got back into it, and have been reading, you know, about a Star Wars book a week ever since. That was
That's
way more than
amazing.
you wanted to know, I'm sure.
No, that is everything we all wanted to know. I promise you. That's pretty solid. That's really cool. I like that.
I
It's
appreciate
it's
the
interesting.
enthusiasm.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting to hear how everybody got started, because we all had to get started somehow, right? It's not like
Yeah, right.
it's inane for us to just know what Star Wars is. So
Well,
there's
and
the
it's not,
start.
you know, the Legends books, they're not encouraged in school. You know, we had to read all these different books, and we did AR, which was this, you know, program. We had to have books that were at our reading level and the right number of pages, and you had to take a test on them afterwards. There were no Star Wars books in the catalog. No Star Wars books in my school library. In fact, I did a book report over one of the Jedi Academy books, which was like 350 pages. I was in 6th grade. I'd read an adult novel, and my teacher ridiculed me in front of the class and said, "Shouldn't you be reading something, you know, more complex than this?" And I was like, "No,
Wow.
I'm in 6th grade. this book is way above my reading level. And,
It's an adult novel, lady.
I'm going to start going to therapy pretty soon to deal with some of these issues, I'm sure. But
it's funny.
it was one of these things where, if you were going to get into Legends, it didn't happen by accident. You couldn't do it for school. It had to be because you loved Star Wars.
Very true. Very, very true. And you're right. It was never assigned to me. It's not like I had to read them. I wanted to. So, there's that. That's a big thing.
Right. And so, we're thinking about Legends here, and we've talked about this a little bit, but I think one of the things that's important for us to talk about here is what is it about Legends that makes it so iconic and distinctive to you? We've got the new canon out now, and I think by and large, the new canon has been good. There's been a few stinkers along the way, not pointing any fingers, but there's been a few that I've thought, well, I could have done without that one. But by and large, I think they've probably been like Bs on average. A few really great standout books, but now that we've got something to compare it against, we've got quite a few new canon books since 2014. The first, of course, being New Dawn by John Jackson Miller. Anything after that, 2014 and on, is the new canon. So what is it, though, besides books being published prior to 2014 that makes a Legends book a Legends book, in your opinion?
It's very interesting. Definitely, it was from what I'm seeing, it's a different set of authors for sure. Maybe not 100%, but you're
for the
seeing
most part, right?
Yeah, seeing new names. So the style is definitely a little different, but also Legends. It's very interesting because I'm looking at our show notes, and this is something we should probably talk about, because I didn't notice this until maybe 2013, after I started looking at all the Legends books and the release schedule as well. But you want to go ahead with this one, because I think this is a really interesting one, with the first bullet point that you have here about the Clone Wars.
Sure. The history of Legends is really interesting. Of course, Freddie mentioned Splendor of the Mind's Eye. That I think is our first Legends book, unless we want to count the original novelization, which was published before the film in 1976. But besides, this very first era, which includes the Bryan Daily Han Solo books, which of course were published before, before Heir to the Empire, we had like the old L. Neil Smith, Lando Calrissian books. There were just a few in this early era, 80s, but starting with Heir to the Empire, that's when things really got kicked off. We'll come back to Heir to the Empire in a minute. But when it was being developed, when the expanded universe was in development, of course, hey, this is all George's stuff. So publishers came to George and they said, well, George, we're going to bring some more authors on to write some more Star Wars books here. What can they and what can't they write about? And here's what Freddie's talking about. George explicitly said, don't touch the Clone Wars. Don't get into anything that happened before the original trilogy. I'm going to go back and I'm going to work on that. I've got episodes 1, 2, and 3 I'm going to do. And so George gave full license. He said, I don't really care what you do with anything after Return of the Jedi. And that's where we get Heir to the Empire. That's where we get Truce at Bakura, New Jedi Order, Legacy of the Force, Fate of the Jedi, so forth and so on. I mean, there's just dozens and dozens after Return of the Jedi. I think Legends, to me, is a lot of post-Return of the Jedi material.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of post-Return of the Jedi material and a lot of character building from even more than what we witnessed in the movies. It was character building on Luke Skywalker, on even the little characters in the cantina. We gave them names, gave them histories. It seemed like it was just trying to get as much as possible from what we had just off of the movies. We didn't have any characters created. These were some new characters that Mara Jade came from. I forget where she started.
Heir to the Empire, I think.
I think it was Heir to the Empire. But it was just character development and world building, and it's still happening right now. They're still doing that in the new books, but
it's been a little safer. They've colored between the lines a little bit more.
Exactly. So that's the difference that I'm seeing so far with and I feel like we're still in the infancy of canon. Is
absolutely
it looks like we have a coloring book we don't quite know what it's going to get colored into yet, but we have it. Whereas before it was just like, man, what is this? What is this planet? And it's just completely
Yeah.
different things and just sometimes out of left field.
Right. Blank pages. Just
Oh,
a blank slate.
I mean, True Sebakura itself is a very very odd, interesting book. I'll just say that. I don't want to talk about it yet. We'll talk about that.
Doesn't it have like two different races of dinosaurs?
Basically.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I read one of the new Jedi Order books goes back and touches on it. Or maybe it's something later. Fate of the Jedi was kind of a greatest hits of Legends. It goes back and hits different planets and plot points and follows up on them. One of those was a follow-up to True Sebakura, and I just remember every page thinking, this is nuts. What is even happening?
Yeah, it's pretty crazy.
But we'll save that for another episode, sure.
Of course.
Yeah, so that's one of the things that's really iconic about the early days of Legends, especially the 90s, is it was a lot of post-Return of the Jedi material. Once we got into the 2000s, especially like 2008, 2009, 2010, we started seeing more tie-in material to the Clone Wars, and then especially getting into the Old Republic stuff, which there's some really cool Old Republic material in Legends. But in terms of other things that make the Legends universe iconic and distinctive, I think one of the things that's very easy to see is that Luke, of course, doesn't know about the prequels. Now, that's obvious to us because the prequels weren't made yet before 99. Luke is like trying to discover tidbits about the Jedi of old. And so a lot of the Bantam era books, I'm talking about like the 3 or 4 different trilogies. Of course, you got the Jedi Academy trilogy, but then there's the Callista trilogy. I'm trying to think of the proper name for that trilogy. You've got the Black Fleet Crisis, and there's trilogy after trilogy after trilogy of Luke trying to learn a little bit more about how to be a Jedi, because he had a day, 2 to 3 days with Obi-Wan, and then 2 weeks tops on Dagobah. Don't you think any longer than that?
I think it was about 2 weeks. Like, I mean, if you look at it, you could probably say it was over a week. He didn't have much time, so he was on his own. He had to figure out how to be a Jedi and what a Jedi was.
Yeah, and then the Legends books he's not just going to be a Jedi, but he has to now train new Jedis, and he basically knows nothing about how to be a Jedi. So a lot of those books are him just trying to get tidbits about, well, hey, this is what the Jedi used to be like. And it's kind of interesting to go back and read now that we have the prequels. But that's one of the really iconic things. What else do you, Freddie? Anything else that stands out about Legends?
What I really liked at a certain point in time, I can't remember exactly when, but there was actually a storybook group who was, I know it was Leland Chee, Pablo Hidalgo, and I can't remember who else, but they were tasked with making sure that these books were not contradicting themselves. So, the early days of Legends, it's kind of interesting because, some of those are not so I don't know how to call it, maybe accurate or just in line with canon. But as you read on, you notice that they build off of each other, or, one character, if it died in this book, you will hear his death maybe in another book.
Yeah.
Or if,
you start paying closer attention to continuity.
Exactly. Continuity was really big for them. And and you'll notice that in the books. You'll kind of see like the very beginning, the early 90s, all the way from Splinter of the Mind's Eye. They just have this funny feeling about them, which is very nice to go back to every once in a while.
Just beautifully, perfectly nostalgic.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's what Legends are. It's just nostalgic.
Absolutely. Even if you haven't read them yet, you can still go back and experience like, oh, this is what Star Wars was like in 1991. For me, the only other major thing that is iconic about Legends, especially now that we've got the sequel trilogy, and that is the big difference here is in The Last Jedi, we find out Luke did not succeed with his Jedi Academy. All right, he was doing okay with it until he made his snafu with Kylo. Or with Ben Solo here. He goes into his hut, and whichever interpretation on that you want to take, that's fine with me. But he obviously shouldn't have even contemplated assassinating his nephew in his sleep. And so Luke failed with his Jedi Academy in the new canon. But in Legends, Luke succeeded with his Jedi Academy. So you've got some Jedi who had been in his academy on Yavin 4, which, man, I love anything set on Yavin 4, for the record. He succeeds with that Jedi Academy. And so you've got Jason and Jaina Solo going from that academy on to becoming prolific Jedi. You've got Kip Juron, Corran Horn. Shout out to the Doctor himself, Corey Helton, with his love for Corran Horn. Just unabashed love of Corran Horn.
Oh, he loves him so much.
So much. And so you've got, and then there's another major player from the Jedi Academy. We'll have to cover it another day. I'm forgetting. There's a handful of Jedi who are trained by Luke, who then go on to help train more Jedi. And it's one of the things that works really well is you see a lot of Jedi coming up in the Legends universe after Return of the Jedi, and you can kind of pick a favorite, get attached to one. A personal favorite of mine is Lobaka, Chewbacca's nephew, the Wookiee Jedi with his red lightsaber. It's just wonderful.
Oh yeah, I'm right there with you on Lobaka.
Yes, we're going to rename this podcast instead of Legends Lookback. Lobaka Lookback. Say that 5 times fast. I can't even say it. Lobaka Lookback. All right, bad name. Scrapping that idea. But we've talked about some of the things that make Legends what it is, and it's just got me excited to open a book. I don't know about you.
Oh yeah.
Let's move on into talking about some of our favorite Legends authors. You probably have to spend a lot of time on this, but any standout authors to you from Legends? There really is a little bit of overlap. We've had Zahn come back. We've had John Jackson Miller do both. Lucino, of course, is written in both universes, but there really is a pretty distinct difference between the new canon authors and the Legends authors. Any stand out to you as some of your favorites, Freddie?
Yeah, and you know what? I think this goes without saying that anybody who is an EU fan and who has read Legends books will agree that there's a handful of authors that we can all agree is on our list of our top 3, even top 5. John Jackson Miller, which I know we could all say is maybe a fan favorite.
Especially because of Kenobi.
Oh,
he really outdid himself with that one.
Yeah, Timothy Zahn.
I love a lot of his stuff. Oh yeah, Zahn, of course.
Oh yeah, and those 2 guys are just heavy hitters. And then James Luceno, I would say, are just definitely on the top of my list.
Yeah, this is why we're becoming friends here, Freddie. We've got some similar taste. For me, I want to add in Aaron Alston. I'm actually writing a guide right now for Youtini. If you haven't really discovered our reading guides, really encourage listeners to check these out. We've got a handful of writers for Youtini who are cranking out these reading guides, saying like, "Hey, if you want more books to read about Mara Jade, if you want more books to read about Yoda, or books that have to do with the Phantom Menace, books by a particular author, we've got John Jackson Miller up there, Claudia Gray, Timothy Zahn. In fact, Carl just wrote one today, all right, by Alexander Freed that was published. And so, but the one I want to throw out there is Aaron Alston. I'm writing a guide about Aaron Alston right now, and he died tragically in 2014. Rest in peace. He really just captures the heart of Star Wars, the humor of Star Wars. His stuff is so witty and it's just so energetic. It just moves at a perfect pace. Got great character development. Alston wrote for the Wraith Squadron books in the X-Wing series, and then he was in the catalog of authors writing later in the timeline in Legacy and Fate of the Jedi. Have you read any of Aaron Alston, Freddie?
Yeah, actually, I have. I would say he's just up there along with all my other favorite authors. There's just so many of them, and we'll go through yours as well, because I would say they're probably just about the same. But he's definitely. I like reading a lot of their books. Let's just say that.
All right, good.
Yeah.
Only other 2 I want to mention. These are maybe less noteworthy in terms of they don't receive as much notoriety, but another deceased author, writer, producer is Bryan Daily. Bryan Daily, of course, wrote and produced the original Star Wars audio dramas. Have you listened to those?
Oh man, those are fantastic.
They're just so iconic. So iconic. And they really capture the heart of Star Wars. And and that's what he was so good at. He actually there's a great interview with him in an issue of Star Wars Insider. I've gotten a collected edition over here on the shelf. Really, really in-depth interview. I'd encourage all listeners to seek it out. I'll try to find more information about them. But Bryan Daily, he said for him, writing Star Wars is easy because he's basically Han Solo. He says, I never have to think about it, what Han Solo would say, because it's exactly what I would say. And he wrote the original Han Solo trilogy. It was written in the early to mid-'80s. I need to double-check dates on those. Bryan Daily wrote those. He also wrote another audio drama, Mission to Ord Mantell, which I listened to this year, which is really cool, short, quick. And then I really like John Ostrander in the comics. He wrote the Quinlan Voss series. He wrote the Legacy series with Cade Skywalker. His stuff's fantastic.
Absolutely.
Let's move on into our favorite Legends books then. Were you going to say something else, Freddie?
Oh, no. I was just going to say that everybody you just named, just going back and looking at the books that they've written on the Youtini website is just, I'm just remembering some of these old books that I need to dust off and get back to reading.
There we go. Shameless plug again to visit Youtini.com.
Number 2.
And you can, of course, order books through our affiliate links, which helps us pay the bills in terms of, Freddie and I, hey, we're not seeing that money, but we're sure that it's going to a good use. It's going to go for hosting the site, and there's all kinds of expenses. We do different services that, help us keep things running in terms of our automation and record keeping, Airtable. We just have all kinds of stuff running behind the scenes at Youtini that isn't free. So you can order books through the site, of course, Amazon affiliate links. But let's move on, Freddie, into talking about our favorite Legends books. Now, this is the meat of it. This is the heart. Okay, this is the good stuff. There's going to be a few basic books that everybody's going to agree are just really good. And if there's one or two that, are not your personal favorite, by and large, these handful of books are just beloved by the Star Wars community. That would include, of course, the original Thrawn Trilogy, which now we're about to get our third Thrawn Trilogy. What do you think of the new Thrawn announcement?
I'm always, I like Thrawn. I think he's just, a lot of people have their different opinions on Thrawn, but there's just something about him and just bringing back the old memories of Legends. And I'm so glad that out of all the people they brought back, they brought Thrawn back. That is just the one thing I have to say.
I think more importantly to me, rather than bringing Thrawn back, I think it's exciting that they brought Zahn back.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like, hey, you want another trilogy? Go for it. And so it's pretty exciting to me. The sky's the limit with what he can do. We've got, of course, the original Thrawn Trilogy. We're talking about Heir to the Empire, Dark Force Rising, and The Last Command. In fact, I've got a teenager at my church. I'm a minister, and so we've got a big following amongst the teens in terms of their love for Star Wars. And one of the teenagers, Noah, just returned Dark Force Rising to me the other day. He just finished it, so he'll be moving on to The Last Command pretty soon. And I gotta say, I couldn't be prouder.
I'm glad you're just spreading this among the new generation.
Spreading the gospel, of course, that's what I do for a living, but then also spreading the gospel of Star Wars, okay? And so we've got the original Thrawn Trilogy. I'd say the Revenge of the Sith novelization, of course, is maybe the best Star Wars book. I think in terms
I would
of,
say so.
Writing style, it's on another level.
Completely on another level.
And then we've got Kenobi, the Bane trilogy. I think for most people, these are really high in terms of their, they're going to be enduring. They're not going away anytime soon. They're just going to be unequivocal recommendations, as well as one that I see you've got on your list. Freddie, you want to talk about Darth Plagueis for a second?
Oh, yeah. Darth Plagueis was, if you listen to, I forget which episode, it was one of the very first episodes of The Living Force, but I talked about this as being one of my favorites, even though we were only talking about canon books. But I believe Darth Plagueis,
broke the rules.
I broke the rules, and I did it willingly. But, Darth Plagueis is one of those books where it's, I don't even know how to describe it. It's right there with Kenobi, in my opinion, where unless we're being told something else in another canon book or in a movie, to me it's still very true, right? So and a lot of what they talk about in Darth Plagueis is mentioned in the prequels, so you can kind of relate those things together. But Darth Plagueis is one of my most favorite Legends books, um, mainly because it goes through something that we never have really gone through before, which is Palpatine.
Right, right. It's the have you seen the Joker?
Yes.
Okay, I haven't seen it yet, but the idea here is you take the origin story of this extremely iconic villain, and it's heartbreaking and dark, and this is really what Plagueis was. It was Palpatine's rise to power, but it's also in many ways about Maul, and of course Plagueis, the titular character here. Did you ever hear the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise? It just takes that little snippet from the movie, from Revenge of the Sith, and it makes it's like a 500-page book. It's massive. He
It is.
goes to a whole nother level with Darth Plagueis.
Yeah, I would say that book, just if you have not read it yet, I would say put that on your list of to do, because it describes a lot, it explains a lot, but you also just, when you watch the movies again after reading it, you're like, oh man, I get it.
Yeah, and it makes the prequels so much better.
Oh yeah.
It enhances them in the best way that a novel should. Ideally, a good EU book should make you go back to the movies and say, "Oh, I love these even more now." And I would actually really recommend the audiobook. There's a different reader for that one. See if I can um, use a good old-fashioned Google here to find out the narrator. He only does this one. It's his only Star Wars audiobook, and it is just so rich to listen to. And especially toward the end, the climax, I won't spoil it. There's this section where he just lays it on thick with his Palpatine voice, and he starts monologuing. And every time I listen to it, and it's pretty much a yearly re-listen for me. Whatever I'm doing, I just stop and cackle. I mean, it's absolutely deliciously evil.
So good.
See if I can find the narrator on that. You want to move on to some of your other favorite
Yeah, sure.
EU books, Legends books, as I find that in the meantime?
Yeah, no problem. So again, I'll hit True Sepakura. We talked about that, and I feel like that deserves a whole episode because I keep talking about it. And I know a lot of people will probably just laugh because it's maybe not one of the best books, but it's very interesting. Let's just to preface it, it takes a sci-fi approach to Star Wars, which Star Wars is sci-fi, but it's mainly fantasy, so it kind of throws in a little too much sci-fi at times. And then in episode 0, we actually talked about a couple of really good books, and very, especially in this month, Death Troopers is very different, and it hits a horror genre, which I don't believe Star Wars before that had ever hit.
Not quite like Death Troopers. You had some
No.
kind of Goosebumps-esque books. Those are more spooky than horror. Like playfully spooky.
Absolutely. Yeah. Of course, I would say this is on a lot of people's list, but Heir the Empire. Kenobi.
It's so good. I mean, we're going to spend at least a whole episode on that. Zahn's so groundbreaking with it.
Absolutely, especially for the time. Like, you got to consider that too. That's something that not a lot of people will consider. Is look at the time we were in. Look when he wrote it, and just this book coming out. Imagine seeing this thing and reading it for the first time when it was published.
Oh yeah, I can't imagine what it was like. I think I discovered that one. I remember buying it from the used bookstore in my hometown when I was like 10 or 12, but I didn't get to it until 2013. I didn't read it until I was in college, and oh yeah, it was just so excellent, so excellent. In terms of the new characters he develops and the settings as well, great. It's got some great planets and some good new aliens, and of course the villain in Thrawn. What's not to like about the original Thrawn trilogy?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And one more before I throw it back to you, but I would say the last book that I will always keep on my list of favorite Legends books, and I know it's not really a Legends book, but it is a guide. It's the Essential Reader's Companion. And
Everybody's
if you
gonna
have
have
not picked,
this.
yeah, if you have not picked that up, what it is Pablo Hidalgo went through every single book, everything. I would say more than just books.
Oh, even
It
the short
was,
stories, the comics.
yeah, the short stories in the magazines. He went through everything and pretty much gave a synopsis of what it was about and the background of what happened during this time, what was going on. For
The behind
instance,
the scenes info.
exactly. So, like for instance, in Death Troopers, he also talks about the campaigns that were going on, through Star Wars Galaxies and online and all this other stuff that you would not have gotten anywhere else. So I think that's an absolute must.
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. It's got original artwork in there too, which is really cool. And in some ways, besides fan art, it's the only artwork we're going to have besides the cover art on a lot of these books. And they deserve the art, and so it's great in terms of that. You just settle in by the fire next to the Essential Reader's Companion. You can spend a whole day on this thing.
You could
It's
probably spend a week
excellent.
or more. Yeah. So,
Uh,
what about you? What are some of your favorites?
Yeah, I'll take a crack at it. So we've mentioned a few of the, major foundational Legends books here. In terms of some that might slip under the radar, I really love John Jackson Miller's collection of short stories in Lost Tribe of the Sith. I just recently went back through this as I was writing about Miller for a collection on the site. And he does such an incredible job in fleshing out the Lost Tribe, which of course is a tie-in much later in the timeline for the let's see, is it the Legacy of the Force? No, it's Fate of the Jedi. There's this
Mhm.
this lost tribe of the Sith that's been on this island planet. Uh, Kesh is the name of the planet,
Yeah.
and now they're reintroduced. I mean, just hundreds of Sith coming back into the galaxy, and it's really cool. And so this is the story of how they started their culture as they got stranded on this planet. You
Yeah,
get a
and when
few
you
different characters to kind of cling on to as you go through 2 or 3 short stories a piece before he moves on to a different point in the series. So you've read that one as well?
yeah, I was gonna say that one is one of those books that, or I think it was an ebook that I first picked up.
Yeah.
Um, it really kind of put the Sith into perspective for me at that time.
Another great book about the Sith is Darth Maul Shadowhunter. This one is a Phantom Menace prequel novel about Darth Maul having his kind of his rise to power as he's trying to prove himself to Palpatine. He's still an apprentice, and he kind of goes off the rails and trying to assassinate a Jedi Padawan who's also trying to prove herself. She's trying to prove that, hey, she can cut it as a Jedi. And so you kind of have these two parallel characters that you're kind of rooting for and rooting against. And everybody loves Maul, but it's a really likable young female Jedi. I don't remember her name. I have to go back and reread it. It's a great droid in I-5 in Darth Maul Shadowhunter. Gets into the underlevels, the underworld of Coruscant. It's just a fantastic Legends book. Moving on from
Yeah.
there, I love all the Jude Watson books. She's got these 3 series that are interconnected, and they're published by Scholastic. They're for probably a 10 to 12-year-old audience. They're like 120, 130 pages each of large print. You can read the book in probably 2 hours. There's the Jedi Apprentice series about Obi-Wan under the tutelage of Qui-Gon. And then moving on from there, you've got the Jedi Quest series of Obi-Wan training Anakin. And then there's a 3rd series because, hey, if 30 books isn't enough already, let's add another 10 more into the mix. And it's called, is it Fate of the Jedi? That can't be right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we'll have to
maybe
go
so.
back and
I've
check
got
that.
it over here on the shelf. Is it The Last Jedi? No, there's 10 of them, and it starts off with Obi-Wan after Revenge of the Sith. He finds like another Padawan who survived the purge. He tries to bring him in, and they work together to try to take down Darth Vader, but they have to be careful about how they do so. So it's kind of a undercover special ops series. Oh man, so good. They're so unique in that I think a lot of Star Wars fans have snoozed on them because hey, maybe they're for younger kids. But I recently went through all 40 of those books over the last like 2 years.
Wow.
Really love them. They're easy to pick up and read. You can just binge them. She does a great job at developing each little planet, couple of characters in each one that are only in that one book, maybe another 2 or 3, but for the most part, self-contained. She gets into some crazy stuff, especially for Qui-Gon. Some non-canonical material in terms of an illicit love affair for Qui-Gon. Those are just so worth it. So worth it. Not especially easy to pick up. There's only ebooks for the second 2 of those series, Jedi Quest, and then the third series. I'll find the title on that in a second. I did find the title on, or I found the narrator on Darth Plagueis, and that's Daniel Davis. Shout out to Daniel Davis for such an excellent job on that.
Oh yeah.
Excellent
Absolutely.
narration. Rounding out for me, I would add in a couple of comics series to my favorite of Legends. I love the Dark Empire comics. I really want to have a whole episode about Dark Empire. Oh, I love those so much. It's so nostalgic for me in a couple of different ways, but it's like Luke has to turn to the dark side in order to take down the resurrected Emperor. I mean, if that's not enough to hook you, I don't know what is. Am I right?
Yeah, absolutely.
They're
Yeah.
so unique and weird in some ways, but dark in a really groundbreaking way at the time. I think first one came out in 91. So especially relevant now with the resurrected Emperor, something like that, in The Rise of Skywalker. So now's the best time to read Dark Empire. Before
Oh,
The
absolutely.
Rise of Skywalker, you can have the inside scoop. And then finally, for me, the legacy comics I mentioned. I think it's John Ostrander and Jan Duursema. Well, we'll work on that for our episode about those, I'm sure. But it's set 100 years after the fate of the Legacy of the Force series. I mean, it's just way after everything else in the timeline. Great character development in terms of some of the main characters in that series. And it's 50 issues, so it's enough to really sink your teeth into, but not too much to be overwhelming. Everybody I've recommended those to has loved them. Any others for you that we haven't mentioned yet, Freddie?
When you mentioned comics, and I would say I think it was around 2013. I can't remember exactly when. It was the last Star Wars titled run before Disney scooped them up, and they just had the most beautiful cover art that I've ever seen ever. I don't even know how to describe it. Just the first one just had the shades of blue and some red, and they were beautiful covers. The books themselves, they don't pan out as well. It's just kind of goofy, some things that happen, because obviously we've got the sequels now, but I think that alone the cover art was just absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah, but nostalgic in the way that makes Legends so good.
Oh yeah, very, very nostalgic.
I found the name of that series. It was The Last of the Jedi. If that's not confusing enough, it's The Last of the Jedi. So cut me some slack here, listeners, for getting confused on that. Not The Last Jedi, The Last of the Jedi. But a good series, definitely worth it. So moving on, Freddie, is there anything currently that you're reading for Star Wars? And we're talking about some nostalgic stuff here, but we can dip our toe outside of Legends for 20 seconds here. What's currently on your bookshelf?
Right now, I'm actually reading Black Spire in the canon, and
Okay, yeah, cool.
I'm switching between 2 right now, and the second one would be Kenobi. I'm rereading that one.
Both of us, excellent. Yeah, that's got to be coming
Yeah.
up soon then. Awesome. Yeah. Black Spire, I thought it was really good, but we won't get into that now. Save that for the other podcast. Listen to the 2-part round table. They did a great job with those.
Yeah, it was really good.
I really came to appreciate that book a lot more after listening to the Living Force coverage of that. And then we want to, of course, continue to plug for readers to go back to the website and check out some of the other stuff we've cranked out recently. If you've listened to episode 0, we want to encourage you to pick up the collection that Charles wrote just out of pure excitement that we're going to be doing this show. He heard that we were talking about Death Troopers and Red Harvest, and he said, I'm going to have to write about that. So he wrote a horror collection for the site, a Halloween collection. It's got horror. It's got, of course, Death Troopers and Red Harvest. He also mentions the Boba Fett's Ship of Fear book, which is a good kind of spooky one. We've got the Glove of Darth Vader. What are some of the other scary ones on that list? Do you remember?
No, I can't recall. I just have to say, I love that Charles just heard our pilot episode and just went out there and just took care of it.
Yeah, he knocked that out quick.
He did.
And it's excellent. He talks about Tales from Vader's Castle. Now got
that
second
one's
run
really
on
good.
that going on. Those are just excellent in that line of Star Wars meets spookiness in the best way possible. We've got other collections that were just recently published between last episode and now, featuring Mandalorians, Boba Fett, as has been mentioned. We've got a John Jackson Miller collection, Alexander Freed, and Christy Golden. This is all just within the last 2 weeks. So some good stuff being put out there. So thank you so much for listening, guys. We're getting started with this podcast, trying to get our feet on the ground here. You were right in on the ground floor of this thing. So where were you when we started Legends Look Back? You'll remember. That does it for this week. Thanks for listening to the show. We'll be back in a couple of weeks with another episode as Freddie and I talk about these excellent books. And who knows, we might even have one of our awesome team members by then joining us. In the meantime, you can follow the main Youtini Twitter account at Youtini_US, or of course, the Living Force Pod at Living Force Pod. I'm on Twitter personally as Jared Q. Mays. And what about you, Freddie?
I'm at Wake Up Freddy.
Wake Up Freddy. We're going to have to get the story on your Twitter handle one day. I love it. I love it. So check out our new reading guides and play around with the Youtini bookshelf. I used that in the wild the other day in terms of trying to find a Star Wars book. And I said, is this on my collection? Is this on my shelf already? In the meantime, keep the Youtini fan code and be a force for positivity in the fandom. So Freddie, until next time, may the force be with you.
Take care, Jared. May the force be with you.
This has been a Youtini production.